There are people you only meet once, and yet they leave an imprint that even time cannot erase. You thought it was over, that you had moved on. But sometimes, in silence, in a dream, in a prayer, their memory returns. Is it just nostalgia? Or is it a reminder from above? What if this separation was written, not as an ending, but as a divine pause? If someone is truly meant for you, how will you know they're coming back not by chance, but by decree? What you're about to hear now could change everything. Stay until the end. You'll understand why. Untung. Silence after separation. There are silences that don't make a sound, but that cry out in your soul. You live your life. You do what's expected of you. You even laugh sometimes, sincerely. But deep down, there's a space that no one touches. A place so discreet that even you pretend not to see it. You don't cry anymore. You don't talk about that person anymore. And yet, they still live within you. Not obsessively, no, it's more subtle. They're there. In the interstices of your daily life. In a word someone speaks. In a place that reminds you of a season. In a silence between two prayers. Have you ever wondered why some people leave your life, but not your heart? Why, even after detachment, a breakup, or distance, do you still feel their presence in your inner world? You don't want it to be there. You want to move on. And you try. But nothing erases it completely. You've even prayed to forget. You've asked Allah to free you from this invisible bond. And yet, it remains. Not like an obsession, but like an imprint. As if a part of you knew that it wasn't the end. Not really. So you pretend to have moved on. But sometimes, when night falls, when the world quiets down, you feel this emptiness. An emptiness that isn't just absence. It's an emptiness full of meaning. What if this silence you feel was an echo of the decree? What if this feeling that something or someone is missing wasn't an emotional void, but a spiritual reminder? What if Allah showed you, through this quiet pain, that some things aren't meant to be erased, but only put on hold? It's not nostalgia. It's something else. Something unclassifiable, inexplicable. A feeling that words can't reach, but that the soul recognizes. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're simply human. And sometimes, in this fragile humanity, Allah teaches you to feel what you don't yet understand. Sometimes, the silence after separation is louder than the arguments that came before, heavier than goodbyes. Because it's not a final silence. It's a transitional silence. A silence that doesn't herald disappearance, but transformation. Something has changed. You've changed. The other person has too, perhaps. But the story has remained suspended. Suspended in a sky you can't see, suspended between two prayers, between two seasons, between two inner resurrections. And you continue to live, asking yourself, why do I still feel this way? Why doesn't this person completely leave my heart, even when my reason has consigned them to the past? What if it was Allah who wanted this name to remain within you? Not to make you suffer, but to prepare you? Prepare your heart for what will return, not as before, but with meaning, with healing, with a maturity you didn't have before, with a light you hadn't yet found. Because sometimes, time doesn't separate. It rebuilds. And this silence you feel, perhaps it isn't a punishment. Perhaps it's a sacred space, a waiting area, a celestial departure lounge, where Allah keeps you in patience and faith, until the perfect moment. So you continue, you move forward, you grow, but deep inside, that peaceful emptiness remains. And sometimes it whispers softly to you, it's not over. Two paths, one writing. They didn't break up. They didn't scream. They didn't even tear each other apart. They simply drifted apart, gently, silently, like two boats on a calm sea, slowly and silently pulled apart by the current. There was no explosion, no drama, just this strange feeling. We need to distance ourselves. He carried ruins within him, wounds he had never truly faced. He thought he could love, but he was still fighting against himself, against his past, against what he hadn't healed. She felt a call, not toward him, toward something higher. She was beginning to hear, deep in her prayers, something she hadn't listened to before. A need to reconnect, not with him, to his creator. So they let things end, not because they didn't love each other, but because they no longer knew how to love well. Not yet. The phone went silent. The conversations died down. And in that emptiness, something strange settled. A calm that had nothing to do with forgetting. A silence that resembled waiting, without either of them knowing exactly what they were waiting for. They were no longer looking for each other, but they couldn't completely erase themselves either. And then, something began to shift, not in their gestures, not in their hearts, but above them. Something neither he nor she saw. A shift in the invisible, a subtle realignment, as if their separation had triggered a readjustment in Allah's plans. Each of them, on their own, moved forward. She prayed more than before. She wept in her prostrations, not for him, but to understand why her heart couldn't find peace. And little by little, she realized that she had placed her hope in people, instead of in the one who holds hearts. He found himself facing his emptiness. She was no longer there to distract his unhappiness. And then he had to really look at himself. Not the mask, not the appearances. Him, raw, broken. And in this breakage, he began to rebuild himself. Not for her, but to find his inner dignity, his connection with God, his guidance. They didn't expect each other. They didn't spy on each other on social media. They didn't look for signs in each other. But something still connected them, an invisible thread. Taut, but never broken. A name each kept deep in their invocations. Not to ask for a return, but to ask for the true good. And that's where the world went wrong. The world would have looked at them and said, it's over. But Allah had never called it an end. It was just a pause. One of those pauses that only He knows how to orchestrate. A strategic separation, not to punish you, but to shape you. Because there comes a time when love is no longer enough. You need light. And sometimes, you only find light by moving away from what you thought was your destination. There were two of them. They took two paths. But it was the same writing, one author, a single goal. And as each moved forward on their own path, somewhere in the sky, their paths began to slowly draw closer. 3. What if? What if? It wasn't an accident. What if this separation, as painful as it was, wasn't a rejection, but an elevation? You think you've lost someone. You think it's a mistake, a wound in life, a consequence of a bad decision. But what if it wasn't a punishment? What if it was a purification? What if Allah had taken this person away from you? Not because you didn't deserve them, but because you didn't yet deserve yourself. What if this distance, this emptiness, this silence were the only way to straighten up, to reconnect, to get back on your feet, without depending on a human being to feel you exist? Why do some faces fade painlessly, while others, even after months, even after years, remain there, in your heart, in your memory, as if they had been inscribed somewhere other than your mind? Why do you still feel something, even when everything seems over? Why does that name continue to float in your thoughts, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't return to it? Is it just you who refuses to let go? Or does it come from elsewhere, from a higher, more sacred place, where ties aren't severed as easily as missed calls or deleted messages? What if that connection wasn't emotional, but spiritual? What if it was a trace of a decree not yet fulfilled? What if Allah left you this memory, not to attach you to the other, but to draw you closer to Him through this ordeal? Have you ever considered that the lingering memory is perhaps a sign that this story wasn't given to you to consume as a distraction, but to understand it as a heavenly message? What if in this phase you can't forget, Allah had shown you a side of yourself you had forgotten to develop? What if it was less about the other, and more about what this bond awakened in you? A tenderness you had never felt, a pain you had buried, a vulnerability you had never accepted. What if Allah had brought you into contact with this person not to build an us right away, but so that each of us could build their me in truth, before being able to find ourselves in the light? What if what you're missing wasn't the other person, but the version of yourself you had begun to discover by their side? What if you now had to raise this version alone, in faith, in secrecy, in peace? What if instead of asking when will we meet again, you had to start asking, when will I be ready, Allah willing, to love in a pure, aligned, balanced way, and not in a wounded way? You're looking for answers outside. But what if you listened to the silence? What if you asked the questions in your prostration and stayed there without demanding an immediate answer, just to feel the peace of being on the path, even without knowing where you're going? What if Allah showed you that some pain isn't there to break you, but to guide you? What if this lingering memory wasn't an unhealthy attachment, but a reminder that everything you experience has meaning, even in the invisible? So, tell me, are you ready to hear everything except what your soul already knows deep down? This connection, this face, this absence, maybe isn't a mistake. What if you had been brought here today to hear precisely this? For the sand and the sea. Imagine 2 grains of sand, tiny, invisible to the naked eye, and yet perfectly distinct in the writing of Allah. They lay side by side for a moment, carried by the same wave, rocked by the same current, and then the ocean changed, the sea rose, the tides turned. One was pushed east, the other south, far away, separated by miles of water, time, silence. But see, they didn't choose the waves. They didn't decide the wind, the storms, or the tides. They simply let themselves be carried. For everything in the ocean obeys a single commandment. And in this vast movement, in this powerful dance of the waters, there is a secret that only the divine eye grasps. What the sea scatters, it can also bring back. Because in the depths, beyond what we see, beyond what we understand, there is an invisible trajectory. A call, a secret magnetism, a beach, where lost grains always end up returning. What if this was your story? What if you were those grains of sand, separated not by mistake, but by necessity? One had to learn to float alone, to survive the storms, to understand that the ocean is vast, and that one cannot get lost in it if Allah guides the currents. The other had to reach the bottom, face the pressure, and let himself be polished by the salty silence of the depths. And while everyone thought they were lost, forgotten, abandoned, the sea continued its work. Because what the human heart calls separation, divine wisdom calls circulation. A necessary movement, a formative detour. You think you're far away, but distance is relative, when the one who separates you is also the one who brings you back. And that's why you still feel this connection, because deep down, your soul still hears the undertow. It senses that something awaits you somewhere, without form, without promise, but with certainty. The grain of sand never knows where it's going. It can only have faith in the sea, and you don't need to understand everything, only to let yourself be shaped. To accept that sometimes, to find yourself again, you must first be broken, then reconfigured by the divine current. Because you don't hold the map, you don't control the tides. It's Allah. And He loses nothing, not a glance, not a memory, not a soul. So even if you're light years away from that person, even if you no longer speak, even if everything seems erased, remember, what the sea has separated by decree, it can bring together at the exact moment the beach is ready. And perhaps right now, while you're watching this video, somewhere, in a corner of the invisible, the currents have already begun to turn. 5. When you feel it's not over. You don't think about him every day. You don't wake up with his name in your head. But sometimes, without warning, he returns to your heart. Not as pain, not as missing, but as a distant, familiar presence. Like a scent that still lingers, long after the person has left. And you stay there, frozen, observing this strange feeling that runs through you. It's not an obsession. It's not even attachment. It's something else. Softer, calmer, almost sacred. It's as if your soul is whispering, it's not over. Not yet. And you don't understand why. You've mourned. You've suppressed the memories. You've asked Allah to heal you. And yet, deep inside you, something remains. Stable, silent, but very much alive. You try to push it away. Because you want to move forward. Because you tell yourself there's no point in hoping. That maybe it's just your heart refusing to let go, but that's not it, not really. What you feel, it's not a whim. It's an inner intuition, a profound calm, as if your soul already knew something that you yourself don't yet know. And in this calm, there is neither anger nor impatience. Just this phrase that returns gently, like a wordless prayer. If it's written, I will find it. But how can you move forward with a heart that's waiting without being sure of what it's waiting for? How can you turn the page when the story doesn't seem to have been completely written? How do you silence a soul that feels it hasn't experienced everything yet? You struggle. You pretend to be detached. You smile. You keep busy. You pray. But sometimes, in your deepest prostrations, a name comes back, not as a request, not as an obsession, but as a distant echo. Ya Allah, make it for the good. And maybe that's true emotional maturity.
Not hoping, not forgetting, but accepting. Accepting that your heart still feels. Accepting that some ties are placed there, not by you, but by a hand that sees beyond you. And sometimes, accepting is saying this phrase that only sincere hearts can pronounce without breaking, "O Allah."
If it is written for me, bring it back in a pure, beautiful, and protected way. But if it is not written, free me gently without damaging me. This is not an admission of weakness. It is an act of faith. It is the recognition that your heart belongs to Allah and that you are ready to let Him decide its guardian. And in this submission, you do not find forgetfulness. You find something even greater. You find peace. 6. Those who found each other. They didn't make eternal promises. They didn't say, "I'll wait for you no matter what." They didn't swear in the rain or carve their names on a bench. No. They let go. With faith. With dignity. With that kind of serene sadness that only those who believe in divine wisdom can feel. They didn't fight the distance. They didn't struggle with the memories. They cried. Yes, they prayed surely. But they didn't force Allah's hand. They understood something few hearts accept. If it must come back, it's not up to us to hold it back. So they went their separate ways. Separately. She, with her mixed doubts and hopes. He, with his wounds and his deep silences. They didn't know if they would ever see each other again. And somewhere, they had accepted that perhaps they would never see each other again. But they walked, not toward each other, not toward memories. They walked toward Allah. And in that walk, they changed. They experienced ihsan. They learned to love without possessing, to pray without demanding, to hope without becoming attached to a form, a face, a scenario. She grew in her modesty. He matured in his sincerity. Their hearts stopped looking for proof in the world. They began to look for signs in their inner peace. And then, one day, without waiting, without planning, without seeking it, their paths crossed again. It wasn't spectacular. No film on, or no scene to slow down. Just a look, a calm, a silence. And in that silence, a shiver. No overflowing passion, no tears, but a deep gratitude, as if the soul was saying, "I know." They were no longer the same. They were deeper, more aligned. They needed each other less, but more to offer. Because between them now there was something they hadn't had the first time, more of God. And it was this presence that made the encounter different. Not perfect, but sacred. They didn't run into each other's arms. They simply smiled, with that light in their eyes that only those who have let Allah write history can carry. They found each other again, but not through their efforts, not because of their will, because of their surrender. They found each other because they understood that walking towards Allah is always walking towards what is truly meant for us. 7. The moment everything changes. There is this moment that no one sees coming, often silent, discreet, but also decisive. It's the moment you stop begging, the moment you stop wanting immediate answers, the moment you let the weight fall off your weary shoulders. You stop asking, well, why me, why him, why now? Because you finally understand that some things are not meant to be understood. They are meant to be experienced, accepted. You begin to submit, not out of weakness, but out of a new, profound, invincible strength. You stop clinging to what you have lost, and you begin to prepare yourself for what you must become. You realize that this return, if Allah wills it, will not be a mere coincidence nor an easy gift. It will be a reward, a gift, a miracle reserved for those who have shaped themselves, who have grown in silence, who have endured storms with patience and faith. So you work on yourself, in the shadows, out of sight, without noise. You cleanse your heart, you straighten your intention, you nourish your soul with pure hope, without expectation, but with certainty. And that's when the unexpected arises. Not like a clap of thunder, not like an explosion, not a notification on your phone, not a message. No, a subtle sign, a stirring in your heart, a breath, a light that pierces your inner darkness. You know, you feel, you know it was never really over. This moment is your awakening, your passage from expectation to certainty, from confusion to clarity. And even if the rest is still invisible, you now walk in the light of this silent promise. Because this moment when everything changes is a gift from Allah. A key given to those who dare to lose themselves in order to better find themselves. You can't force a return. You can't plan a meeting. But you can become the best version of yourself. The one who welcomes what God brings back to her at the right time, in the right state. If that person returns, it will never be because you waited for them. It will be because you rose above it. Because you let Allah rewrite history. And now, ask yourself, am I chasing someone? Or am I walking towards Allah and trusting in Him? If this message has awakened something in you, share it. Perhaps someone needs to hear this today. Like, comment, subscribe. And above all, stay connected to the one who unites hearts when the time is right.